Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we share powerful narratives that touch the heart and spark meaningful conversations. Today, we invite you to journey with us through a story of reconciliation and growth, where two individuals, once divided by their differences, find a way to come together and understand one another. Stay tuned for a tale that shows us how empathy can truly change lives. It was a crisp afternoon in Los Angeles. The sort of day that seems to invite introspection, as if the world itself were slowing down to catch its breath. The sky was clear, a serene blue that could make anyone forget the relentless pace of the city below. Barron Donaldson, now a young man in his late teens, had spent the morning in quiet solitude, reading a book by the window of his apartment. He had finished his work for the day and decided it was time to step out, to enjoy the city in its most unhurried state. For him, the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles often felt overwhelming. But today, he sought a moment of peace. He had been to the Terrace Grill before, the restaurant nestled in a quiet corner of the city, a place known for its sophisticated atmosphere and understated elegance. It was the kind of establishment where the wealthy dined in hushed tones, their conversations revolving around investments, travel, and the latest trends. But the food was exquisite, the service impeccable, and the ambience, well, it offered a kind of tranquility Barron craved, a retreat from the endless noise of public life. Dressed casually, but with the same quiet confidence he always carried, Barron made his way to the restaurant. The hostess, a poised woman in her mid-30s, greeted him with a polite smile, leading him to a corner table by the window. Barron appreciated the corner spot, out of view of most, but close enough to observe the room without feeling exposed. He took a seat, adjusted his MAGA hat, something he wore frequently as a symbol of his personal beliefs, and settled in with the menu. The hat, though, seemed to draw immediate attention. At first, it was subtle, a glance from a nearby table, a soft murmur among the wait staff, but soon it became apparent that Barron's presence was causing ripples through the restaurant. The patrons' eyes shifted between their wine glasses and his hat. Whispers traveled across the room like invisible waves, carrying with them unspoken judgments, assumptions, and questions. Barron noticed, but he didn't react. He had long learned to carry his beliefs with quiet dignity. His intention was never to provoke. The hat was simply a part of him, something that connected him to his own convictions. But in that moment, it was clear that it had become something far more than just a hat. It was a symbol of political statement, a trigger. Then came the manager, mid-40s, sharply dressed in a suit that looked like it had been cut from the finest cloth. The man approached Barron's table with a purposeful stride. His face was tight with determination, his posture rigid as if ready for a confrontation. "Excuse me," the manager said, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of the nearby diners. "We have a policy against political apparel here. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat." Barron's reaction was calm, measured. He wasn't rattled, just surprised. His eyes met the manager's without a flicker of anger. He removed his earbuds slowly and placed them neatly on the table. "I wasn't aware of any policy like that," he replied, his tone respectful yet firm. The manager, undeterred, gestured vaguely toward the entrance. "It's written in our code of conduct. We want this to be a neutral space for all guests." Barron, who had grown accustomed to navigating the complexities of public life, paused. He glanced around the room, noting the eyes that followed him, some pretending to be indifferent, others not bothering to hide their curiosity. But he wasn't there to make a scene. He was simply there for lunch. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "I'm just here for lunch." The manager's expression hardened. "You need to take the hat off, or I'll have to ask you to leave." Barron's face remained unreadable. He didn't hesitate, nor did he raise his voice. He simply stood up, gathering his belongings slowly. "If that's how you feel," he said quietly, "then I'll leave." There was a stillness that settled over the room as Barron left, his chair scraping softly against the floor, the clink of his untouched water glass echoing in the silence. The door swung open with a soft chime as he exited, the cool air brushing against his face. He paused for a moment on the sidewalk, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over him. He wasn't angry, not exactly, but he felt let down. It wasn't the hat, or the policy, or even the manager. It was a larger picture, the realization that even in the most seemingly neutral spaces, the divisions of society could not be avoided. He adjusted his hat, a small, almost imperceptible gesture as if reaffirming his choice, and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't about politics. It was about how easily people, places, even could dismiss each other because of something as simple as an article of clothing, something that symbolized who they were. Barron didn't want to make an enemy of the terrace grill. He didn't want to engage in a public showdown. He had always believed in kindness, in understanding, and above all, in treating others with respect. But this moment, this encounter, had left him questioning whether that same respect was being reciprocated. And so, instead of responding with anger, Barron decided to channel his feelings into something constructive. He walked a few blocks down the street, found a quiet bench in a nearby park, and pulled out his phone. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was looking for clarity. He texted his mother first, explaining what had happened. Then, to a few close friends, asking if he was overreacting or if the manager's response had been justified. The replies came quickly. One friend said, "That's insane. They shouldn't have treated you like that." Another wrote, "You handled it better than I would have." As he read through their messages, an idea began to take shape, one that could transform the frustration he felt into something meaningful, something that would bring people together, rather than driving them apart. And so, instead of allowing the day's events to fade into bitterness, Barron began to make calls, each one a step closer to creating something greater than the petty divide he had just encountered. Little did the manager of the Terrace Grill know, the incident had just set a chain of events into motion that would change the narrative from conflict to connection. The days that followed the incident at the Terrace Grill were quiet for Barron, but the weight of what had transpired hung over him like a thick fog. He spent the evening at home, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of tea in hand, staring out the window at the glittering lights of Los Angeles. The city was alive with energy, but to him, it felt distant, almost cold. The more he thought about the encounter, the more it gnawed at him. He had been treated unfairly. Yes, but more than that, he had been given a glimpse into a society that was so quick to judge, so quick to divide itself over even the smallest of differences. The hat had been the catalyst, but it wasn't the real problem. The real problem was how easily people were willing to tear each other apart over beliefs, symbols, and appearances. Barron had grown up in a household that valued unity. His mother, Evelyn, was a philanthropist who spent much of her time working on initiatives that brought communities together. She had always taught him that when faced with division, the answer wasn't to retaliate with more division, but to find a way to bridge the gap. She had always told him that real leadership wasn't about power. It was about influence, understanding, and, most importantly, compassion. He could still hear her voice in his head, as clear as it had been all those years ago. When you walk into a room, don't look for the things that separate you from others. Look for what connects you. But Barron wasn't sure what connected people anymore. He had seen too much division in the last few years, too much hatred and bitterness. His hat had become a symbol of a growing cultural divide, a divide that felt impossible to bridge. But perhaps that was the point. Maybe the only way to start mending the wounds was to take the first step. The idea started small, but it grew rapidly in his mind: a fundraiser, a public event to promote unity and understanding. It would be more than just a charity event. It would be a platform for people of different backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences to come together and talk openly about the things that divided them. A chance for healing. He didn't want to take revenge on the restaurant. He didn't even want to make a statement against it. What he wanted was for people to see beyond their differences, to understand that unity could only come from understanding, from dialogue, and from empathy. Barron didn't waste any time. He began to put the wheels in motion. He reached out to the people he knew, his network of friends, colleagues, and influential figures who had been a part of his life for years. He was determined to gather a diverse group of individuals who could speak to the issues of division. And he was confident that, if he could bring them together, he could create a space where people could share their thoughts without judgment. A place where the walls of societal separation would come down, even if just for one evening. The first call was to his mother, Evelyn. He knew that if anyone would understand the importance of what he was trying to do, it was her. She was a woman of action, someone who had always used her position to foster positive change. "Mom, I need your help," Barron said, his voice steady but urgent. "I want to do something big, something that will bring people together, to show them that we don't have to be divided by what we believe or where we come from. I'm planning a fundraiser for unity. I want to bring in speakers from different backgrounds, people with opposing views, and create a space where we can actually talk to each other." Evelyn paused, taking in the weight of her son's words. Barron had never been one to jump into projects without careful consideration, so she knew this wasn't a fleeting idea. He was serious. "I think it's a brilliant idea, Barron," she said, her voice full of admiration. "But it won't be easy. People don't like to listen to ideas they don't agree with. But that's exactly why we need something like this. I'll help however I can." From there, Barron's network began to expand. He contacted local politicians, activists, business leaders, and educators, people who could speak to the issues of division in the country. He also reached out to cultural icons, social media influencers, and even individuals from opposing political spectrums who were willing to have a civil conversation. Barron knew it would be a challenge to bring them all into one space, but he believed in the power of dialogue. If he could get them to the table, to simply listen to one another, then perhaps they could begin to understand where the other was coming from. It was no easy task. There were those who were skeptical, unwilling to lend their names to something that might not fit into their carefully crafted public images. But Barron was persistent. With each conversation, he spoke from the heart, explaining his vision of unity, how the event wasn't about politics, or religion, or anything that divided people. It was about showing the world that empathy and understanding were not lost causes. That, despite everything, people could come together for the greater good. The fundraiser took shape over the next few weeks. Barron and Evelyn worked tirelessly behind the scenes, reaching out to sponsors and organizing every detail. The event would be held at one of the city's premier venues, a sprawling hall with a view of the skyline. There would be food, entertainment, and, most importantly, open discussions, a series of panels where speakers would address difficult issues: race, politics, social justice, and more. The evening of the event arrived, and Barron stood backstage, watching as guests filtered into the venue. They came in elegant gowns and tailored suits, but the atmosphere was different than the usual events he attended. It wasn't about status or wealth. It was about coming together, standing in solidarity as a community. As Barron made his way to the stage, he took a deep breath, his mind momentarily drifting back to the terrace grill, the restaurant, the manager, the hat. It all felt so small now. It was an experience that had, ironically, led him here, to this moment, to this place of greater purpose. He stepped out into the spotlight, the crowd's murmurs quieting as he approached the microphone. Barron smiled to himself before he spoke. "Good evening," he began, his voice strong and steady. "Tonight, we are here to start a conversation, not about politics, not about race, but about what makes us human and what makes us stronger when we come together, despite our differences." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling in. "It's time we stopped letting fear dictate how we see each other," Barron continued, "and instead, let's start looking for the common ground that binds us together." It wasn't just a speech, it was a call to action, one that Barron hoped would echo far beyond the walls of the venue, reaching hearts and minds everywhere. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The night of Barron's fundraiser had ended in a resounding success. The event had drawn a crowd from across the political and cultural spectrum, and the discussions had been passionate, at times heated, but ultimately constructive. For Barron, it had been a validation of everything his mother had taught him about the power of dialogue, and he had felt the weight of that responsibility keenly as he moved through the crowd. speaking with guests and listening to their thoughts. There was still work to be done. Of course, unity was not something that could be achieved in a single evening, but for the first time in a long while, Barron felt a flicker of hope that change was possible. As the last of the guests filed out and the staff began to clear away the empty wine glasses and discarded napkins, Barron received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was one he recognized instantly. Robert, the manager of the Terrace Grill. Barron. Robert's voice sounded tense, but also sincere. I've been thinking about everything that happened that night. I've had some time to reflect, and I want to apologize. Barron paused for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He hadn't expected this call, not from Robert, the very man who had seemed so intent on shutting him down at the restaurant. Go on, Barron said, his tone neutral but open. I was wrong, Robert continued. I was so caught up in what I thought was right, in the rules, that I completely lost sight of the bigger picture. You were trying to make a point, and instead of engaging with you, I dismissed you. I misjudged you. Barron, I let my own biases take over, and I regret that deeply. Barron didn't speak immediately. He had been so wrapped up in his own frustrations about the encounter that he hadn't expected this kind of introspection from the manager. His mind shifted to the moment when Robert had first asked him to leave, how it had felt so unjust, so personal. But now, hearing Robert's apology, Barron realized that maybe there was more to the story than he had initially thought. Everyone, even those who made mistakes, was capable of growth and change. Perhaps Robert was no different. I appreciate you saying that. Barron finally responded. It wasn't easy for me, either, but I also understand where you were coming from. Sometimes, the simplest things, like a hat, can set off a chain of reactions that we're not even aware of. It's hard not to react, to try to impose what we think is right. But sometimes, we all need to take a step back and listen. I know, Robert said quietly, and that's exactly what I've been doing, listening. I've been talking to some of the staff, hearing their perspectives, and it's been eye-opening. I've realized that I've been a part of the very thing that you're trying to fight against. This idea that we can't accept people who are different from us. It's a form of division that's hard to escape when you're not even aware of it. Barron felt a flicker of respect for Robert. It took courage to admit when you were wrong, especially when you had been in a position of authority. Barron understood that power, whether in a restaurant or a corporation, often created a sense of invulnerability. But Robert was breaking that mold, acknowledging his mistakes, and working to make it right. I'm glad to hear that, Barron said. It sounds like you're really trying to make things better. And that's all any of us can do, right? Keep trying. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Robert spoke again, his voice a little firmer now. I'd like to make it up to you, he said. I know that doesn't change what happened, but I've been thinking about it. I want to invite you back to the Terrace Grill for a meal. No strings attached. Just a dinner. Man to man. I'll even personally serve it to you. It's my way of saying sorry for what happened. And more than that, I want to show you that I'm committed to making this right. Not just for you, but for everyone who walks through our doors. Barron felt a smile tug at the corners of his lips. The gesture was simple, but it was sincere. He'd had no expectations of Robert, but this felt like more than just a chance to smooth things over. It felt like an opportunity to truly connect, to have a real conversation, without the animosity or the walls that had existed before. I'd like that, Barron replied. I think it's time we talked. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a bit of what I've been trying to do with this fundraiser. Unity starts with small steps, doesn't it? Exactly, Robert agreed. And I'm ready to take that first step. Barron ended the call with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long while. It wasn't just that the apology had come, or that it had been genuine. It was the understanding that sometimes resolution came from the most unexpected places. The manager of a restaurant that had initially rejected him had come full circle, recognizing the importance of empathy and change. And Barron knew, in that moment, that he had made a difference, not just with the fundraiser, but with the way he had approached the situation. It wasn't about confrontation. It was about conversation. And it was about being willing to listen, even when it was difficult. A week later, Barron found himself sitting at a corner table at the Terrace Grill, the same restaurant where everything had begun. Robert had personally chosen a selection of dishes for the evening, each course more exquisite than the last. But it wasn't the food that mattered, it was the conversation. As Barron took a sip of wine, Robert sat across from him, his hands clasped in front of him. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "What you said about unity, how we need to stop dividing ourselves by symbols, by beliefs. It made me question a lot of things. Maybe that's the real key to moving forward. You know, not trying to be right all the time, but just trying to understand." Barron nodded. "Exactly. No one has all the answers, Robert. But if we don't try to understand each other, how will we ever find the answers that matter?" For the first time, Robert seemed truly at ease. "I think I'm starting to get it. It's not about being perfect. It's about making the effort." Barron smiled, raising his glass. "Here's to efforts, and to second chances." And as they clinked glasses, Barron realized that in this moment, something had shifted. The world, with all its divisions, might not change overnight, but small, genuine moments of understanding could, in the end, move mountains. Thank you so much for watching today's story on Empathy Stories. We hope it inspired you to reflect on the importance of listening, understanding, and reaching out to others, no matter where they come from. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that remind us all of the power of empathy. See you in the next video.